2CC podcast.
One of the things we talk about a lot on this program is housing affordability, and infill, as they call it, has been one of the most controversial aspects of Canberra's growth in recent years, with debate over whether we should build more housing in existing suburbs or release more land for entirely new suburbs. The emergence of dual occupancy after the Mr. Fluffy buyback scheme has raised the ire of many residents, groups and community councils. To talk to us about the benefits or not of infill is Steve Chandler. He's an award-winning property development trainer and property development expert, and he's with us. Steve, good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
A lot of people disagree with this concept of infill, but you say it is a way to effectively reduce urban sprawl and better utilise in existing infrastructure, but also create more affordable housing options. But in Canberra, does all of that really play out?
No, I think it plays out everywhere. Look, the reasoning I say that is when you consider, I use an analogy of rain and storms. That if you've got like light soaking rain over a large scale area, it's easy for Mother Nature to accommodate it. You know, it can dissipate, it can get away, and it's well shared. But if you don't have this form of development, what generally happens, you either end up with urban sprawl, and that's got environmental issues, or you end up with high-rise. And if you have high-rise, high-density, multi-storey towers, that's where it's like a rainstorm hitting one area. And peak hour in those areas is a nightmare. Everything becomes a problem. So to me, I think it's very important that if you have got population growth, then you need to share it across a wider area. And if we're really going down the path of climate change and controlling everything and trying to reduce our impact on the land, how could we possibly not support infill development when it just means urban sprawl?
Well, you've suggested, though, that infill has minimal impact on traffic and retains neighbourhood character, but effectively if you're turning old-style suburbs into dual occupancies and I guess we're saying medium density development rather than high density or whatever I guess you'd say low density is the old third. How can you effectively double the number of residents and not have impact on those things?
Look, you are going to have an impact. There's no doubt you will have an impact. It's just nowhere near as severe as if you dump everything into a high-rise development, or you spread it out into the peripherals of a city. So every time you go out further, you need that new infrastructure. You're putting cars on the road. Government never puts a railway, for example, in before a new suburb gets opened up. It's always retrospectively, and it's always too late. So in the meantime, you've got squillions of cars hitting the urban fringe, and everyone travelling into the city to get to services, not just to get to work, but for services as well.
So how do you actually manage it, and where do you draw the line? I mean, before, because if somebody's on a quarter-acre block, it's fairly easy to turn that into a dual occupancy setting, but I guess you've got to be very, very careful about where you do these kind of infill developments.
No, I agree with that, Steve. That's definitely a key thing. You must maintain local character. And by doing that, you can sort of minimise the visual impact, if you like. A lot of good quality design, and this is where the key is the design of the properties. You can't put sort of 4 or 5 story buildings in amongst 2-story housing or single-story housing. What you would need to do is limit the height to 2 stories, so it would and have the design requirements such that it fits into that local character. So effectively you could put maybe 4 apartments into an area and have the design of that property look like a house, just a slightly larger house than normal. So I think you can do it. The key thing in this, I think, is always going to come back to traffic. And if we are working from home more and more, then the opportunity to do low-rise, medium density, which is probably the best terminology to describe it, is to put it into these local areas.
I imagine the biggest difficulty here when you talk about maintaining the character of an area, we're talking about older suburbs, because that's the only place where you're going to find land big enough to do these kind of things. How do you maintain that architectural consistency with new buildings?
Hardest part. That is definitely the hardest part, because architecture and architectural beauty is very subjective. The key thing would be the terminology used in the planning controls. It would have to be something where you could do comparisons. So using something like in New South Wales, for example, they have a low-rise housing diversity code. And within that code, which does exactly what we're talking about here, in that code, it's got a design guideline. And that design guideline gives photographic examples, it gives drawings, it shows exactly what New South Wales are trying to achieve with that type of development. So I think if you can put it into a design guideline, it helps to control the outcome.
Yeah, I think that's our biggest problem in Canberra is we don't have much of a planning system at all. Steve, always good to talk to you. We'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Steve.
Steve Chandler, property development expert.
We're talking Canberra. We're talking Canberra.
A 2CC podcast.